Greetings, citizens! I am Toronto's greatest supervillain, Dr. Holocaust, and you are listening to Channel Awesome's podcast, Nerd to the Third Power.
Hello everybody and welcome again to Nerd to the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. I am your host and master of ceremonies, Dr. Gonzo. And, wow, it's a very, very empty room in the studio this week. Kat is out recovering from Tokyo and Tulsa, and Brian is off on family business, so it's looks like it's just you and me this week, Skyblaze.
Well, hell. Oh, hang on. Who's that in the corner?
It's either a shaven yak or it's Projectionist John, back from another lengthy absence.
Oh, there he is. Right, okay.
Now, that is entirely unfair. You have seen my hair and my beard. I am nothing if not unshaven.
I haven't seen shit. We've never met in person. For all I know, this could be some picture that you pulled off of like OkCupid or something. For all I know, you could be a 300-pound balding obese man living in the south of Louisiana.
Shit, he's on to me. Skyblaze, we have to take him out.
Don't get me involved in this.
But you've got all the swords.
I'm on a different continent. What do you want from me?
So yes, it's just the three of us, and originally we were discussing Ant-Man this week, but with half of us gone, the only person that's in the studio right now who's seen it is John. So we're gonna hold off on the Ant-Man discussion until next week when we do it. We're gonna be doing a double feature with Ant-Man and Pixels, which I'm not looking forward to, like, at all.
Sweet revenge.
What are you laughing about, Skyblaze? You didn't have to watch Battleship.
No, I didn't, but it's still fun. It's still funny to watch you suffer.
No respect.
None whatsoever.
But so we're holding off on that. But there's another event that we kind of want to touch on and discuss a little bit, and that's the passing of Satoru Iwata, the president of Nintendo. So we thought that sort of in honor of his passing, we'd sort of take a look at Nintendo's history and its impact on gaming culture over the last 30 years. I think it's safe to say that without Nintendo, at least America wouldn't have wouldn't have the gaming market as we know it today. The landscape would have been vastly different. So that's going to be a fun little discussion. But of course, there is procedure to follow, so we're going to start as always with Ask a Geek, and I've got some questions here. First one here is for all the bronies, so basically all of us. And it's kind of providential that we have the three specific people that we do have in here, because we're all three big Princess Luna fans. The question is from Sarah: what did you guys think of the last episode of My Little Pony and its Luna-centric episode?
I can sum this up in one vocalization. Squeak!
Oh my god, it was
So
everything
you hated it, is that what you're saying?
It was everything I wanted in a Princess Luna episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I needed insulin after it was over because it was all so sweet that I thought I might have contracted diabetes.
I know, right? How adorable is Luna? I just want to gather her up and give her the biggest hug.
I'm just like, and it's, I put this on this show, but I know I mentioned it in our other podcast, Last Exit to Ponyville, that one of the things I wanted to see was how Luna was sort of adjusting to, coming back from her 1,000-year exile and how she was moving on past from Nightmare Moon. And, I really felt like this episode, I don't know what the specific psychological term for it, but I feel like that this episode really addressed something that I sort of have a problem with, and that's beating myself up over things I've done wrong or mistakes that I've made. And to see Luna basically for those who haven't seen it, the plot of this episode is basically after she returned from her exile, Luna came up with this creature called the Tantibus that would basically assault her in her dreams. with visions of her becoming Nightmare Moon and raining chaos and death on the land as sort of a self-flagellation for what she did in reality as Nightmare Moon, and the creature winds up escaping from her dreams and winds up terrorizing, all the dreams of everybody in Ponyville. So basically, think a less lethal version of Freddy Krueger. If I could strain that comparison any further.
That's a good comparison,
and,
actually.
This is something that I particularly kind of struggle with, is like, anytime I do something, I make a mistake or I wind up screwing something, I wind up beating myself up over it. So especially, the biggest example that I can think of, at least that affected the show, was, my big stress-induced breakdown at the end of 2012 that, I just, basically just kept kicking myself over. And I really felt for Luna in this episode, so it was kind of a roller coaster for me, because like I was one minute going, oh my god, you're so cute, I just want to hug you and squeeze you and give you sugar cubes, and the next minute I'm like, oh my god, I want to hug you and pat you and tell you that it's going to be all right, that you'll be okay, that it gets better.
It was very poignant for anybody who suffered from something like depression, because one of the insidious things about depression is that it does lie to you like that. It is this kind of parasitic entity inside your head that tells you lies. Which is exactly what the Tantibus kind of was. So it was quite powerful in a way.
Yeah, it really is. This is one of those episodes that I look at from the perspective of, this being a kids show, its primary audience being kids, and thinking about the lessons that kids are taking away from this. And I look at this as being a very powerful way of talking about things like guilt and depression and just beating yourself up in a way that, a younger audience can grasp, where they might not fully understand it if you just put it out there as it is. And on that level, I saw this as an incredibly good episode for kids to be seeing. And I like the fact that it was dealing with Luna's emotional baggage, because I figured she had to have some. I'm glad the show didn't just gloss over it. And Flutterbat came back briefly, so basically...
And I've got to say, I want a poster of the last shot of the episode of Luna sleeping peacefully under the giant flower.
Oh, I know. That would look so cool
cute.
That would look so cool under a black light.
Painted on velvet.
You're such a goth. I mean, seriously, I'm a goth, and you just blow me out of the water in terms of how goth you are.
Man, you think John's bad. You need to come down to the Lower East Side of Baltimore sometime. You'll see some shit, man.
I have. I've been going to goth clubs since I was 16. 18, yes. 18,
not like
if
this,
anybody's listening.
And her second question is, did we spot the Starlight Glimmer cameo in Amending Fences? To which, we spotted it, and it scared the hell out of me.
I did not spot it. Where was the Starlight Glimmer
scene
cameo?
where Twilight is having dinner with her old friends, there's sort of a wide shot of the whole restaurant, and if you look, you can see Starlight Glimmer in sort of the top left corner, hiding behind a menu. You don't see her face, but you see her hair and her arms, so we're pretty sure that it's her. And the animatic that was released over Comic-Con pretty much confirms that she has made it to Canterlot. So I can't think of how it could be anyone else but her. So now I'm kind of scared to see what kind of shit she's got planned.
Well, damn. How many episodes have we got left in the season, anyway?
Well, it's on hiatus now. Damn.
Every cartoon that I watch is on hiatus. Well, actually, no, that's not true. Gravity Falls and Steven Universe have new episodes next month, but that's still too long.
Yeah, My Little Pony has taken a page from Doctor Who's playbook and split up the season over interminably long hiatuses. So we blame you, Stephen
I was going to get blamed. Like, totally not my fault.
We blame you by proxy. Okay. Next question here comes from Mark, and it is for me, and he asks, what do I think of the trailer for Five Nights at Freddy's 4?
Go on.
When the third game came out, I swore up and down that was where the series needed to end, that there was no other way, no other direction that it could be taken, that all that had been done with it had been done, and I'm fairly certain that some evil entity carried my words to Scott Cawthon's ear, and he replied with challenge accepted, because the trailer that I saw for it, the trailer that's out, has got me hook, line, and sinker, because apparently the plot of this game is, instead of you're a security guard at a pizzeria, you're a little child and these things are invading your home.
Well, crap.
And you've got no cameras, no defenses except for a flashlight. And the thing that intrigues me is apparently instead of remaining stationary like you did in previous games, you're actually going to be able to move about the house. So I'm interested to see what kind of new mechanics come out of this. But I'm hooked. I'm excited for this game, and I'm very happy that Scott has decided to release it early. He's releasing the initial game in August, I think August 15th. So a couple months early from the Halloween release date that he gave us. So I'm looking forward to it. So I'm looking forward to it and dreading it at the same time, because this is me kind of revealing sort of a deep dark secret. But when I was a child, one of my greatest fears was monsters under the closet. So it's like, damn you, you've ripped you've ripped my greatest nightmares out from me, Scott.
Yeah, I saw the trailer. And to be quite honest, like, my personal opinion of the FNAF series, which I am a fan of, there's a lot I could say about how it works and the levels on which it works. My personal opinion of it has been that the first game was the most genuinely creepy of the series, and the next two games were less creepy, but they ratcheted up the tension and the stress by giving you more to manage and more to deal with. Especially in the second game. That's ridiculous how much you have to keep track of in FNAF 2. But the trailer for 4 has me super excited because it looks absolutely terrifying in the way that I like the most, which is to say atmosphere and creepiness, much like the first game.
The scene from the trailer that freaks me out the most is this little 1 second shot where like the closet opens and you see Foxy just like staring at you, and I'm just like, okay, because like Fox has always been like the fast mover. He's the one who he doesn't sit around. He hauls ass and just like jumps you in each game. And for him to just be kind of just sitting there, I'm just like, what are you planning? What are you doing?
I love that scene.
But yeah, no, thematically so far the first game is my favorite, just because there was so much that was left unexplained about what was going on, and I think that really added to the atmosphere. But I think as far as mechanics, I think the second game is my favorite so far. But yeah, I'll be interested to see where this game fits in the series chronology, because that's really the big appeal of these games, is the fan base going nuts trying to put all the pieces together and solve it like a puzzle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Scott Cawthon is really good at not giving you all the answers. Just he's very good at giving you a few pieces of the puzzle that do nothing more than just raise more questions. And to be honest, now I find something very interesting about this. The title of the game, actually, that maybe not everyone has picked up on. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 has the subtitle of The Final Chapter, which most people are going to look at and say, okay, this is where he plans to conclude the game. It may actually not be. Because
it's that's Friday the 13th reference?
Yes, and which Friday the 13th reference is or Friday the 13th movie is subtitled The Final Chapter? The fourth one.
So are you saying that the fifth game is going to be Freddy Takes Manhattan?
No, it would be Five Nights at Freddy's 5: A New Beginning.
Yeah, okay. Well, you know Fox picked up the movie rights, right?
Yes, I do. I also know that what's his name? Seth Grahame-Smith is the guy who's producing on it, and as long as they keep him away from the script, I'm okay with it. If they let him so much as write one word, then we're in trouble.
I'm telling you this right now. The animatronics have to be practical effects. Cannot do them in CG.
Well, technically, they've already been working in CG.
Every time you speak.
He does have a point, actually. That technically is a good point.
Every time you speak. Moving on. This one comes from Robbie, and it is for all of us, and he asks if we're excited about the leaked Deadpool trailer. Which I say, yes. Oh my god, yes. 1,000 times yes. Movie of the year, Deadpool. Can't wait.
I actually have not seen it yet because I've been dealing with other things the past couple of weeks. So when exactly did this leak? I haven't even touched any of my movie news sites lately.
It was first shown over Comic-Con. It hasn't officially been released yet. They always do at Comic-Con.
Right.
They took a phone
Like
and recorded it and uploaded it.
all.
And the real irony of this leak is the whole reason this movie is getting made is because of that leaked test footage that came out about a year or so ago. And now the Deadpool trailer's leaked, and Fox is throwing an unholy shit fit over it.
See, this is the thing. Fox's trailer gets leaked. They pitch a big fit about it. Warner Brothers' Suicide Squad trailer gets leaked. They post this long, legalese, well, we're going to post it officially. We wanted to keep it a Comic-Con exclusive for a little while, but we can't let the low-res version be everywhere, blah, 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 blah. Marvel's trailer...
They were really whiny and
passive-aggressive,
petulant about it. It was kind of like,
Marvel's trailer leaks early. They post a tweet composed only of the words... Yeah, this is the difference
Hydra.
Between
And
companies
then
that know how to
high-res
interact
version.
with their fans and companies that don't.
But going back to the trailer itself, oh my god, it's beautiful. It's like it's clear that this movie is being made by people who know the source material, because Deadpool's personality is spot on, the humor is there, and I knock on wood, this movie's gonna be R-rated, which is what a Deadpool film should be. But everything's there, the humor, the action. I think probably the standout moment to me, the moment I knew that this movie was gonna be awesome, is the first time Wade takes off his mask after he's gone through his transformations. His face is basically hamburger, and the guy looking at him is like, "Wow, you look like Freddy Krueger face fucked a topographical map of Utah." And I was like, "Yes, this movie's gonna be amazing." So yes, I'm excited about it. So I'm gonna shut up now because I could clearly go on for hours about this. So John hasn't seen it yet. Skyblaze, did you see it?
Seen what?
The Deadpool trailer.
Yes.
Okay, and thoughts?
Was alright.
Was alright? Okay, alright.
I think Deadpool has become this kind of mimetical badass kind of champion of the internet, and it kind of occasionally bugs me. Because, it was only a short trailer and it didn't really tell us that much about the movie, so it could still suck. And I don't trust Fox. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I'm edging, it could be awesome, it could be hilarious and brilliant, or it could be shit because it's Fox.
There's a joke in there about Donald Trump and Republicans, but I shall refrain.
I'll take your word for it. We've got enough problems with our government trying to fuck things over. Anyway, but yeah, so cautiously optimistic, but I'm kind of it's getting towards the point when, Deadpool being this kind of incredible character that all the fanboys love is getting a bit wearying. So, we'll see.
You're starting to get burned out. He's starting to get overexposed, is basically what it sounds like you're saying there.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's how I feel about the Minions.
I don't mind the Minions, but then I
Where I close my eyes, I see them dancing on my eyelids. And before that, I worked for Universal Studios.
Alright, well, that's all the Ask the Geek questions that we have for this week. We're going to go ahead and start with our headlines, starting with John, and then, so take it away, John.
Thanks, Gonzo. Well, without further ado, let's dive into the movie bin and see what we've got this week. We begin today with... You know what, fuck it. There's just no way to set up a story this weird. Grave robbers have stolen the head of the director of Nosferatu. In case you thought you misheard, let me repeat. Grave robbers have stolen the head of the director of Nosferatu. F.W. Murnau, one of the greatest directors of Germany's silent film era and the helmer of what some still consider the creepiest and most effective version of Dracula to date, was laid to rest 8 decades ago in a family plot in Stahnsdorf, Germany, just outside Berlin. It appears our mysterious ghouls dug up his coffin, forced it open, and then took the director's head. The coffins of other members of his family were left untouched, which does suggest that the thieves were definitely zeroing in on Murnau, because of course they were. I'm completely speechless about this one, guys. I'm just gonna have to move on. Speaking of raiding the graves of old masterpieces, Disney still seems intent on resurrecting every animated property it's ever made in live-action form. The latest two to join the greatest hits parade are a new version of The Sword and the Stone, which could actually be pretty cool, and a prequel to Aladdin called Genie, which is a project I might have actually had some enthusiasm about were it not for the passing of the late Robin Williams. Honestly, though, I'm impressed at this point with how shameless this shtick is getting. Who's taking bets for the next one? Live-action Fantasia? Who Framed Roger Rabbit with all CG? A remake of Disney's Robin Hood with actual animals running around with bows and arrows? Actually, that last one sounds kind of cute. You listening, Disney? And last, but, actually a little bit least, I'm just going to touch on a tidbit of San Diego Comic-Con news that I really haven't gotten around to yet. Most of the stories that come out of SDCC tend to be kind of visual heavy, lots of trailers and pictures of apocalypse and stuff like that, which doesn't really work well with our podcasting format here at Nerd to the Third Power, so I'm just going to talk about one of the more optimistic developments that I heard from the DC front. It seems that the new Green Lantern movie is going to take an ensemble approach rather than focusing on, say, Hal Jordan or Guy Gardner or anyone like that. The title of the film is not going to be just Green Lantern, like the memorable Ryan Reynolds affair, but instead is going to be Green Lantern Corps. Yeah, we're focusing more on the team than the individuals, and I couldn't be happier about that. Have to say that I'm actually even starting to feel a little enthusiastic about this one. But then again, I was feeling enthusiastic about Suicide Squad until I saw Jared Joker's ink, so what do I know? And that's it for your movie news. Now I turn things over to the mistress of all geekle herself, Skyblaze. Take it away.
Thank you, John. Hello all, and yes, I know it's been forever since I did a tabletop news segment, but that just means there's a lot for me to talk about. Although, I'll be honest, a lot of the big news will have to wait until Gen Con has been and gone at the end of the month. But first up, all the voting for the ENnies, Tabletop Gaming Awards, is now finished. Polls are closed and counting has begun. There sadly has been one disqualification from the nominees already, since it turns out that the Mass Effect RPG was produced without obtaining a license, which was extremely naughty of the publishers. But further news and results from the voting I will let you know once those are in. In our second item of news, popular virtual tabletop services Fantasy Grounds and Roll-D20 have released the numbers for how many people play which games on their services. Dungeons & Dragons 5th Ed is in first place, Pathfinder is in second, and D&D 3.5 in third. 4th Ed is nowhere to be seen, which tells you a lot about how gamers tend to regard that particular edition of the game. For players of Fantasy Flight's Star Wars Imperial Assault miniatures game, it's been announced that the figures for C-3PO and R2-D2 will be coming out soon. The set features not just the minis, but also a new campaign mission, 2 skirmish missions, and 5 new command cards, so you can get the most out of the droids. Now then, did you know that there is a DC Universe deck building game? No? Well, there is. It has the accurate, if uncreative, title of the DC Deck Building Game. Well done, guys. Its producers, Cryptozoic Entertainment, have just announced 2 new expansion sets for it, one for the Teen Titans, and another one based on the Arrow TV series. The game is actually pretty decent by all accounts of people I know who have tried it, so it might be worth checking out if you're a fan of comics and card games. Or one, or the other, or you're a fan of one and want to get into the other. You get the idea. Anyway, the replacement rule set for Warhammer Fantasy Battles has been released by Games Workshop. It is called Age of Sigmar, and the reception has been, well, frosty is about the best word I can describe it. A lot of old school fantasy wargamers are saying that they've made it a bit too lightweight and a bit cartoonish and silly. Some other players appreciate that Games Workshop have streamlined some of the clunkier aspects of the old game, but for now it doesn't look like Age of Sigmar is going to be welcomed with open arms. Perhaps the players will get used to it. Either way, I've letting you know. Historical wargame retailer Warlord Games has got a special summer offer up on its site. If you buy the rulebook for any of the Bolt Action, Hail Caesar, Black Powder or Pike and Shot game systems, you get a free box set of miniatures. The sale lasts until the end of July, so you better hurry up if you want to take advantage of that offer. Speaking of historical wargame retailers and special offers, there is also Victrix, who are makers of fine miniatures for historical wargames. Until the 28th of July, they are offering free worldwide postage on any order over £20. That's $31 for any of our American listeners, by the way. All you have to do is make sure that you enter the discount code FREEPOST over £20, then you get free postage. Whether you live next door to the warehouse or in Siberia, it really doesn't matter. Free postage for you. Also, anybody who's ever played miniatures games knows that spending over £20 really isn't hard. So, those might be worth checking out as well. As I said, currently waiting for the big news from Gen Con, which is at the end of this month. So I'll try and keep you updated with news, but wait for the special Gen Con issue. Well, that's all from me for now. Back to you, Dr. Gonzo.
And that's all the headlines that we have for this week. We're going to take a quick musical break. When we come back, we're going to be discussing Nintendo's influence on the gaming world over the past 30 years. So stay tuned. We got a lot of fun stuff ahead.
Without it, life can't exist. And though it's more
All right, and we are back. And the gaming world was very saddened last week to learn about the passing of Satoru Iwata, the president of Nintendo. And we kind of felt that in honor of sort of his passing, we should kind of take a look at not just his legacy, but the legacy that Nintendo has as a whole and its impact on the gaming world. I think I can say without hyperbole that if it weren't for Nintendo, the gaming market as we know it, at least here in the US, just wouldn't exist. Just the fact that for the longest time, the word Nintendo was synonymous with video games. So they've had a huge impact on the gaming landscape, and I think that it would be a nice sort of little tribute to kind of put on our historian hats and kind of take a look at sort of the impact that Nintendo has had. Now, one thing that that Skyblaze brought up before we started recording, we're of course going to be talking a bit about the gaming crash of '83, but Skyblaze brought up something before we started recording. The UK market wasn't all that affected by the crash, wasn't it?
Not particularly. The impact that Nintendo had here was a lot different because prior to the NES coming out here, most video games were played on microcomputers. Things like the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, and prior to that, these things like the Sinclair ZX81. And of course, for all Brits who are of my age and slightly older, the BBC Micro. BBC Micro, familiar to some people who have been to school in the 80s because it was like in every school in the land. Even produced some graphics for Doctor Who. So that was kind of when we thought video games, we thought things on cassettes in a microcomputer. So the idea of things being on cartridges that you just kind of plugged into a console was something that hadn't occurred to us until the NES came out here.
Yeah, the exact opposite was true over here in the States in the 70s and 80s. Actually, that was really the first medium that games were really delivered on outside of dedicated consoles. Because before, the first console that came out, at least in the States, that had programmable cartridges was the Magnavox Odyssey. Before that, games were sold at basically you didn't buy a game console and a game to go with it. Like if you wanted to play Pong, you bought a Pong console and it played nothing but Pong. You want to play Centipede, you bought a Centipede console that played nothing but Centipede. So there really wasn't much of a home game market until the Magnavox Odyssey and the Atari entered into the scene. Because prior to that, everything was in arcades. And how do I want to phrase this? There's a lot of talk on the internet, especially nowadays, about what caused the great crash of '83, and you get a bunch of different answers based on who you ask and what they know. Those without any knowledge of the crash will point to the big pop culture parts of it, like the Pac-Man Atari port and the E.T. cartridge, which was just recently dug up in New Mexico, which I was surprised when that happened because I would have swore that was just an urban legend, but no, it's real. So hey, I'm $70 poor. But it was really a bunch of smaller things. Well, not necessarily smaller, but sort of behind the scenes things that led up to it.
It's very unusual for a large economic event like that. It's always struck me as being unlikely that it was just one thing.
There's really like kind of a timeline that went with it. So you'll cast your mind with me back to the halcyon days of the mid to late 70s when Atari was the big fish in the pond. I think the sort of the pebble that preceded the avalanche was their policy of not giving credit to their programmers. They had sort of this mentality that if we name the people who are making our games, and other companies are going to come in and swoop up all of our talent. And I don't know if this was Nolan Bushnell's policy or someone under him that instituted it, but it was when the game Adventure was published. One of the designers, Warren Robinett, I believe his name was, put in this little Easter egg where if you hit this one pixel in this one room in this one dungeon, you could actually see, like, you know, created by Warren Robinette flash on the screen. And that, you know, from there, one thing led to another, and it basically led to a bunch of Atari staff leaving and forming Activision, which is the first third-party developer. And Atari was just not fucking having any of this, because, you know, at this point in time, there was, you know, the ColecoVision and the Intellivision were also starting to get big, and there were a bunch of other smaller consoles. So they actually took some of these third-party developers to court, and I believe it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the court ruled that, you know, game consoles were no different from stereos or VCRs, that anybody who wanted to produce software for these consoles could. And the result was that everybody and their mother fucking started making games. You would start to see companies that had no logical connection to video games suddenly starting up electronics divisions and making games. You know, Quaker Oats had one. Fucking Milton Bradley started up one. I think the one that the nadir of the whole thing, for me at least, is when the Purina dog food company came up with a promotion where you sent in, they came up with a promotion where if you sent in so many box tops, you got a game that they made called Chasing the Chuck Wagon, which was so rare, so few of them were produced and sent out, that nowadays chasing the Chuck Wagon is sort of a slang term for hunting for rare vintage old games. So, you know, and the thing is, like, you got to remember that the gaming market back in these days was very young. It was pretty much the pioneer days, you know, covered wagons and the Wild West and shit. Nobody really knew how this market was going to shake out. So now you've got all these companies making games for multiple different consoles. So the idea of the console exclusive wasn't really a thing yet. If you want, so you started seeing, you know, games being made for like 6, 7, up to 12 different consoles. I would say if you want to look at that thing at something that is emblematic of the video game, of what caused the video game crash of 1983, there's a magazine ad that ran for Qbert, and you can find it online if you look for it. But it's basically a series of screenshots of Qbert from all of the different consoles that it's produced for. And if you look, you'll see there's no appreciable difference between them now, you know. Maybe not so much nowadays where the PS4 and the Xbox One and the PC are kind of running neck and neck, but certainly if you compare it to, like, say, like the Super Nintendo versus the Genesis, you know, the idea of what console was more powerful than the other is, you know, wasn't really much of a big factor in what games were designed back then.
They were all pretty much, from what I understand, they were all pretty much running on the same chipset.
I can't speak either way to that, but as far as the processing power, yeah, if we're talking strictly by numbers, yeah, they were all pretty much identical. So nobody really knew, you know, what console to buy, and the market was just so oversaturated that the American buying public just decided, you know, just screw this whole mess. Now, you certainly had a couple of high-profile failures in this case. The Pac-Man debacle, which was one of the first real big licensing deals, because remember, Pac-Man was huge. Pac-Man was monstrous back in those days.
Yep.
So for Atari to snag the home console rights was a coup not seen since the Russian Revolution, if I may.
And then they had the most impressively botched port of the era.
And it didn't help that they produced so many cartridges thinking that this game was also going to sell consoles. And they made a lot of the similar mistakes with E.T., which was actually the first movie license game, and a sign of things to come, where they actually produced more cartridges than they had produced consoles. So that was, there were a couple of high-profile failures, but I would say that was sort of just the sign of things to come, was the Pac-Man port and the E.T. game. So the game market pretty much just collapsed under its own weight. Everything just oversaturated, nobody knew what to buy, so they just decided not to buy anything. Well, about this time in Japan, a company called Nintendo was making some headway into the arcade market with a little game called Donkey Kong, made by a then unknown developer named Shigeru Miyamoto. Now, I know that, you young pups who have, grown up with your Pokemans and your Marios, you're probably thinking, you've never known a world where Shigeru Miyamoto wasn't basically the Jesus Christ of gaming. But, there was a time where he was a no-neck, no-name, just like you or I.
And let's not forget that Donkey Kong was not originally Donkey Kong when they were first developing it.
Indeed, it also went through several iterations.
Well, originally, from what I understand, it was supposed to be a Popeye game, where the part of Mario, or as he was known back then, Jumpman, would have gone to Popeye, Pauline would have been Olive Oil, and Donkey Kong was supposed to be Bluto. But for the very simple and specific reason that they could not secure the license, they had to come up with a different idea for the characters.
I've never heard that, but I could very easily believe that.
I have heard that. I don't know how accurate it is, but I have heard that stated before.
Like I said, I've never heard that, but I could very easily believe that, especially if you look at the sprite for Donkey Kong from that game. If you make a few choice,
recolors, a few recolors,
a few choice lines with an ink pen, you've got Bluto. So no, that's interesting. If that's true, then I've learned something new today. So yay! And it's also kind of interesting to see that Nintendo almost didn't come to this country as a console manufacturer. In fact, the first overtures that they actually made to Atari to basically act only as a developer, and Atari would themselves publish their games. Now, what torpedoed this deal, and this is a sort of a lesson for you business students in reading the fine print of the contract. There was an electronics conference that the then president of Nintendo and a couple of his entourage were coming over to negotiate the rights with Atari for the console rights to Donkey Kong. Now, the emphasis on console rights is intentional because at the same time, they had negotiated with another company for the home computer rights. I think you see where this is about to go.
Oh.
So this other company was at that same electronics trade show. So the Atari heads were walking around this trade show, saw Donkey Kong being played on this home computer system, and hilarity ensued. He completely blew up on these visiting Japanese executives, and the executives basically said, okay, you know what, fuck it, we're not going to do business with these people, we're going to take our ball and we're going to go home. And that was sort of the catalyst for Nintendo deciding that they were going to enter into the American game market on their own. The problem was, again, this is still sort of the throes of the gaming crash. The gaming public, the American buying public, video games were a very bad thing, is what the American public saw video games as. So they couldn't sell it as a gaming console because nobody would fucking buy it. I was like, oh, hey, another game console. We've already got fucking 20 of them. What makes this one so special? And here is where we saw what I would call the first spark of Nintendo's marketing genius. You can say whatever you want about Nintendo's game design and how they build their games, who they cater them to, but one thing that is undeniable about the company is they know how to market their product, and they always have. And this is where we saw the first spark of that. So they decided, instead of marketing the Nintendo Entertainment System as a game console, they'd package this little robot, the robotic operating buddy, with it, and sell it instead as a toy. And they released it to a few test markets. I think New York, L.A., and I think somewhere up in Washington and Chicago. And it was a huge hit. And so they said, okay, well, we'll just release it this way nationwide. And the NES RAW bundle sold like fucking hotcakes. And a couple years later, Nintendo just decided, okay, we've made our foothold. There's no reason for us to have this stupid robot anymore. And, I have a robotic operating buddy, and let me tell you, it's very clear that it was designed just to get Nintendo's foot in the door. You can do almost nothing with this thing.
It's also, there was only like one shipment of the damn things that made it to the UK, so they are rare as gold rocking horse shit in the UK.
Okay, that's a new one. I'm gonna add that to the list. Rare as gold rocking horse shit? Okay.
Yep.
I hadn't heard that one before. So, the NES pretty much, was sold like hotcakes. It was in 1984 or 85, called Super Mario Brothers. And the rest, as they say, is history. And I think if there is any game, any one thing that I could point to that would have that I could say conclusively completely saved and revitalized the American video game market, it's Super Mario Brothers. And the impact and legacy that one game has and the effect that it had cannot be understated.
No, we really
So
can't.
I guess now, since we're kind of putting our historian hats on, let's kind of just take a look at Mario Brothers for a moment and kind of ask, what was it about this game that elevated it to the gold standard that we hold it to today?
Well, okay, this is another thing that I heard. Well, actually, no, I can cite the source for this. I actually read this in an Electronic Gaming Monthly many years ago. There were people who studied 2D side-scrolling platforming games. And one of the things Nintendo is famous for, in some ways infamous for, is playtesting their games to hell and back. That's one of the reasons why Nintendo so often has to delay their releases, because they're still fine-tuning. Some would say obsessively, but I think that's probably one of the big secrets of their success. And I suspect this has been part of the company's philosophy from day one, because there was a study that was made of multiple 2D side-scrolling action games back in the day. What they found was the more similarly a character jumped to Mario, like the more similar a character's jumps were to Mario's jumps, the more people enjoyed the game. If it was a little bit too short, the jump, or a little bit too tall, their enjoyment went down. It had to almost mimic the way Mario did. So Nintendo, right from the get-go with the mechanics, hit some sort of little nail right on the head, hit some sort of little mental itch that they scratched just right, in the way he controlled.
Let's look at not just the controls, but let's look at some of the other things that game introduced that we take completely for granted today.
One thing I was going to mention actually is the music. The interesting thing about Super Mario is that the composers for that kind of hit upon the idea of a looping soundtrack that didn't sound like it looped.
That's a good point.
It sounded kind of like an organic kind of bridging sound, so it didn't sound repetitive. I saw something in a documentary years ago about this, where there was somebody translating for the Japanese composer saying, yeah, the trick was making all of these sounds that weren't repetitive and kind of sounded smooth and organic, and that you could hum.
And what a hummable tune it is! It's
Brilliant.
entered into our genetic memory now.
I know, right?
You come forth from the womb knowing a Super Mario Brothers song.
It's like Tetris, isn't it?
True story. I was babysitting a friend's little boy who was sick and was constantly crying because he just felt so bad. The only thing that got him to quiet down was me singing and humming the Super Mario Brothers music to him.
Wow.
That instantly got him to calm down. Not kidding. And it was only Mario music that worked. I was able to do like the main theme from Super Mario Brothers 1 and the main theme from Super Mario Brothers 2. They both worked equally well. Nothing else did.
Well,
Amazing.
The music was definitely a big thing, but there were so many other things that were introduced that we take completely for granted today. Like, just look at how smooth the animation is, not just in the characters, but in the script. I mean, you could play not. Let's just completely disregard the Atari era. Play some of the side-scrolling platformers that came out on the NES during Mario's day. And a lot of the early ones still had, okay, you move from one side of the screen to the other, and then the screen changed. And the ones that did have side-scrolling, it was, really choppy. Really, you could kind of see the screen, kind of the sprites being drawn in as you moved along. You see this a lot in the early Mega Man games, where the artwork on screen has to kind of keep up with your movement.
And you have things like enemies just popping into existence suddenly without any warning because they just pop up there. Like, I don't know, little games like Ninja Gaiden.
But everything in Mario moved with, and it really felt like there was more beyond what you were seeing on the screen because of that. There were just, everything about it was just polished to a mirror sheen, and so much about it we just take completely for granted today, but it was, heads and shoulders above everything else that came out in those days. Skyblaze, I want to hear a little bit about Nintendo's entry into the UK market, because everything I read about Nintendo's early days is from the American perspective, so I'm interested to hear what the European side of it was.
Okay, bearing in mind that as you say, there's not a great deal of information about specifically to the UK regarding Nintendo, so a lot of this is my own recollections and stuff that I've spoken to with my friends about. Now, bear in mind that the video game market in the UK had survived the American crash, but was very, very different. Because it was all microcomputing. I mean, your video games came on cassettes or they came on floppy disks. So, and it was very, the type of games you would tend to get. You'd get shoot 'em ups and you get RPGs, or very basic RPGs and things like that. Platforming existed, but it was not the most popular genre. The other thing is that, of course, you're talking about microcomputing. If you're talking about controlling a game, you're talking about a joystick. So then the NES comes out, and the version I remember seeing everywhere. Bearing in mind, I was born in 1983, and when I got my NES, I was about 5 or 6. So that would have been 88, 89. Because we got them quite late, I think, UK and Europe. But the package that we got, that I remember seeing everywhere, kind of stacked in the corner of Curry's, was the package that came with the NES Zapper, 2 controllers, and Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt on the same cartridge.
Yeah, that was the family package, I think.
It's the version that I had when I was a kid.
Yeah. That was the version. That was the version that seemed to be everywhere, and that was the version most people I know had. Because, as I said,
Right.
it's
pretty much
the robot was vanishingly rare. Sorry, John, didn't mean to speak over you.
No, I'm sorry. I was kind of like treading on you there a minute. I think I knew like one person who had ROB. I know we definitely didn't. I'm not 100% sure who the original NES was for when it came into my house, because my dad had an Atari. I don't remember if it was like the 2600 or which model it was. I was too young. All I know is that he really liked Frogger Pac-Man and another game that has not quite passed into immortality quite as well, called Lock and Chase. He was a big fan of Lock and Chase. He played that one a lot. And I think the NES was supposed to be his, but I don't think Super Mario Brothers or Duck Hunt quite captivated him as much as those single-screen games did. I think he liked one screen that got progressively more difficult, and he just wasn't as interested in the level system that Super Mario Brothers had, which I think was also kind of unique. I mean, to have all those completely unique levels. Were there any games that really did that before then?
There had been, but they were very rare.
Because
Yeah.
the thing is that prior, you have to remember in the Atari days, game programming was very lazy. So yeah,
well, it was very hard because you were talking about very, very limited ROM space, so you had to cram as much as you possibly could into that space, which meant that if you're talking about, say, for example, you've got a field where a character moves across the field, and if all you have to do is swap in and out of the memory, just like character sprites, rather than the actual level backgrounds and the level kind of furniture, if you like, the platforms and so on, that's a lot easier and preserves a lot more space than having to program in individual levels that all look and feel different.
And what games in the Atari age did have unique levels were really just reshuffling of the same assets over and over again. The one that the most emblematic to me of this is Pitfall, which was the first real side-scrolling platformer. But if you go and you play that long enough, you realize you're basically looking at the same screens over and over, just rearranged, or maybe with a couple extra, crocodiles or holes added in.
It's quite cleverly done, considering the limited space. But yeah, it did have that huge limitation.
And Skyblaze mentioned the hardware limitations. You can see how that so impacted the thinking behind the design, because like I said, you go back and you look at some of the games that were on the NES when Super Mario Bros. First came out, and they still feel very much like old Atari games that were programmed with those limitations in mind. So games like Mario Brothers and later projects like Legend of Zelda not only showed that those limitations weren't there anymore, but also opened up avenues to whole new ways of thinking in game design.
It's also that Nintendo programmers knew what they were doing, because it was their hardware and it was their operating system and it was their programming languages that they'd customized, rather than trying to use like the Atari programmers were doing. They were basically making this shit up as they went along. The Atari was not a good console to program for by all accounts.
None of them were.
But I know most about the Atari because I've heard from programmers who worked on it back in ye olden days, and were like, oh my god, you weren't there, man, you weren't there, and they've got very shell-shocked about it.
Yeah, none of the Atari consoles were very programmer friendly.
By contrast, talking about the British market, I mean, if you had a microcomputer and you wanted to play a game on it, the process for actually playing the bloody thing was so fucking convoluted, because you had to put the cassette in the tape drive, rewind or fast forward it to the correct point in the tape, because it was not unusual for there to be multiple games on the tape. Press play, press a specific sequence of keys on the keyboard, which sequence would depend on what microcomputer you had. And then
sacrifice a goat, make sure the moon is in the 8th house of Aquarius.
Yeah, and then try and load the damn thing, which would, go and make a sandwich, come back, it's crashed, try again, go and make a cup of tea, come back, it's crashed again, try again. Oh, how it works. And it was such a pain in the arse. I mean, worth it for a lot of games, but it was so time consuming, and like you had to pay attention to it, because if it had crashed, you had to start again. Whereas with the NES, you plugged the damn thing in, turned it on.
Now, a couple things that I'm gonna touch base on, because we are kind of running close to the mark here, and that's how Nintendo pretty much created the handheld gaming market with the Game Boy.
Oh god.
And here again, we see where Nintendo's marketing genius comes in, because the NES was seen in its early days almost sort of like it's just kind of a kid's toy. So now they want to come up with a portable game console, but how to market it in such a way that it would be distinct from the NES. And they hit upon the idea of including this little puzzle game called Tetris with it, which instead of being this game that you spent hours and hours playing, was something you could pick up, play on a subway train, and then put away when you got to work. And again, it sold like fucking gangbusters.
It's not even just that. Like, people cannot you cannot overstate the success of the Game Boy. It's probably the most successful console, if you're going to count it as a console. It's the most successful console for the longest amount of time that has ever been in the video game market, because the original Game Boy came out in the 80s, and it basically was number one in the handheld market and completely decimated every challenger that came along, no matter how much more advanced the technology was, because you had other things in the intervening years, like the Game Gear and all these other attempts by other companies to enter into the handheld market, and the Game Boy just trounced them, despite the fact that it was this little 8-bit thing that up until I can't remember the year that the Game Boy Color came out, but up until that point couldn't even display color. It was just absurd, and they just kept making new Game Boys for a while that just had slightly improved design features, like the Game Boy Pocket was smaller, took up less space, and of course the Game Boy Color finally added color to the mix. And that thing that's just chugged and chugged along for years.
The Game Boy Mini, the Game Boy Micro.
Again, I don't think the Micro ever came out in the UK.
It's just absurd how this thing kept going, despite the fact that its technology was practically prehistoric after a certain point.
Here's a fun thing about them. Do you know who they were really, 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 really stupidly popular with?
Who's that?
People in the military.
You know, I 100% believe that.
Oh no, I know that for a fact. Actually, my very first game console was a Game Boy that my father bought for me, and my father was in the Air Force at the time. We lived in Annapolis, just down the road from the Navy Exchange, and my dad, that was if he was gonna buy something that wasn't groceries, he always bought it from the Exchange, because putting money towards MW, morale and stuff, support the servicemen and all that. He could never find a Game Boy at the Exchange because they're always sold out because servicemen are coming in and buying them up to take on deployment. So that was the first time that my father actually cracked and went and took me to Toys R Us where he could find them in bulk.
Yeah, the other thing is the Game Boy is that first iteration of it is known to be virtually fucking indestructible. There's that story about that guy who was like it was hit by a bomb and it's still turned on afterwards. And he sent it to Nintendo, and they were like, "We are going to put this in a shrine, and we are going to send you a brand new one." Correct response.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We see like Nintendo, how technology kind of seems to get more and more fragile as time goes by. But if you threw a Game Boy at somebody back in 1985, you meant them grievous bodily injury.
Well, the other fun thing about the Game Boy is it expanded its market because people of my parents' generation. I got the Game Boy and I was like, I would play it, and I think I left it on charge next in the living room. And then found that my dad had gone, I wonder what this is like, and played it, and discovered Tetris, and then I never saw the fucking thing ever again. Bastard.
See, that's another key to Nintendo's success that we really wouldn't really see explode quite as much again until the Wii came out. Nintendo is good at cracking the gaming market for people who don't usually play games. And that's a little secret of its success that nobody has been able to copy since then.
Like I said, you can say what you want about their game and console design, but nobody can deny that they know how to market shit.
And not only that, but people complain about Nintendo's console design, but other companies may make fun of it, but they're not above stealing the bits of it that work for them. Like Sony, Nintendo was the first one that came out with a rumbling controller when they had the Rumble Pack for the N64, and Sony was like, hey, the N64 controller is a goofy looking design, but that's cool. DualShock. Oh, and we also stole the joystick too, or the control stick.
And that sort of leads us into the other thing that I wanted to touch on, and that's sort of because of its success, it showed other companies that the American gaming market was something that was worth investing in. And we saw the entrance of another scrappy little company from Japan, Sega, and its little lightning blur hedgehog.
Oh
yeah, what's his name? Silver?
Although Sonic took a couple years to break onto the gaming scene. Before that, it was Alex Kidd, I think. Kid. Yeah.
Ask the resident Sega nerd in the room.
From the launch padding off that, it was actually Sega that showed that the world market was still very viable, because as I understand it, Sega was huge in the European market.
It was massive. The Master System sold incredibly well. The Mega Drive was it's still to this day they're so numerous that you can't really get a decent price for them because they are just terrifying.
But it was because of that massive success that Nintendo had that other companies sat up and took notice, like, okay, this is something that it didn't work before, but now it's something that, you know, is worth investing in, and maybe if we're a little more careful about it, maybe we can, you know, revitalize it and have some and be successful at it again. So now, before since we're coming down to the mark here, I kind of want to ask sort of a question here. What do you think is sort of the lesson that we can learn from that? You know, we learned from Nintendo's entry into the market in the 80s, and do you think that those lessons are still being held to today, or do you think that we've kind of lost sight of a few of them?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think that the main thing is know the market that you're reaching for and make the appeal as broad as you can. Don't exclude anyone if you can possibly help it. And I think that ideal has been lost by a lot of companies, not just Nintendo.
The sort of the thing that I worry about is, you know, we've kind of reached sort of the opposite. You know, you talked about how limited programming was back in the Atari days. I think we've kind of reached the other end of that, the other side of the pendulum, where we're kind of reaching for the, you know, more and more, and kind of, you know, we're looking to put more and more graphics, more power, and games are getting more and more expensive to produce. That I'm kind of afraid that the market is the industry is gonna collapse under its own weight again. That's what my big worry is.
Yeah, there's a lot of people saying the same thing. It's because the industry seems to be suffering from what I refer to as the tyranny of the flashing cursor. If you're a writer, if it's professionally or fanfic or whatever it is, if you open up a word processor document, and, you know, the entire universe is at your fingertips, you can write about anything in the world, and, you know, all these possibilities, and you just sit there staring at that flashing cursor. Because there's too much available to you. There is, like, nothing to direct you, nothing to give you focus. Certainly when I tend to do better is if I am given a limit, a prompt. You can say this, you can't say this, you have to have this in it. I find that a lot easier to work with than if I have an entire universe of possibilities, and I think that limitation and the fact that, you know, Nintendo did have those limitations in terms of they went with cartridge, which is the limiting form, and, you know, they had the controller with just a few buttons as opposed to all the buttons in the universe. All these things kind of led to them being very, very focused on what they wanted to achieve. Whereas nowadays they just say, oh, we just throw more money at it and, you know, the sky's the limit. No, wrong, bad. Give your people focus.
And it's interesting that we're kind of starting to see that a bit in the indie games market. People produce. I mean, you know, we talked earlier about Five Nights at Freddy's. I mean, look at how simple that game is, and yet how focused and polished everything is. Whereas you look at, you know, say like, you know, EA or Activision, and, you know, the kind of shit that they do with their budgets, just kind of like, you know, are you trying to produce a movie?
Yeah.
Michael Bay syndrome.
Oh, no. They're definitely not trying to produce a movie, because that would be cheaper.
So that's pretty much all the time that we have for Nerd of the Third Power this week. And like I said, I say again, I think I can say with hyperbole that without Nintendo and its sort of visionary tactics in the 1980s, we wouldn't have the games market that we have today. And I think that even with Iwata's passing, I think that legacy is going to continue for a good long time. So, yeah, that's pretty much all the time that we have for this week. You know, come back next week. We're going to do a double feature, Ant-Man and, God help me, Pixels. I'm not looking forward to that movie at all. So, yeah, that's all the time that we have for Nerd of the Third Power this week. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. We will see you next week. As always, I'm Dr. Gonzo.
I'm Skyblaze.
And I'm John.
All right, we'll see you next week. Talk up, play us out.